Today we're going to talk about a double drawer dishwasher, and it's very much connected to and based on what we already know about our regular dishwasher using one from Milch's and Fleish's. So what's a double drawer dishwasher? Basically what it is it looks about the same size as a regular dishwasher, but it's two separate drawers. Each drawer is basically its own mini dishwasher, and the idea is, they make it so people who won't have a full load to fill up a whole dishwasher can run smaller loads. Each can put some of their dishes to run at a heavier cycle and some at a lighter cycle. So it has two separate drawers to it, and that's built for people who want to have that feature. But a common question that people who keep kosher ask is, can they keep one drawer from Milch's and one for Fleish's? So they can have two dishwashers in the space of one. One will be Milch's, one for Fleish's. Okay, so we know already that there's a good basis for thinking that you can use the same dishwasher for Milch's and Fleish's if you have separate racks, and you're not putting dishes mixed like Milch's and Fleish's together. So you're not going to run one cycle of Milch's and one of Fleish's. And if you hold of that, then seemingly at the first glance you'd say, here it's for sure okay. So they obviously have separate racks. If one is Milch's and one is Fleish's, they have separate racks. They're completely separate from each other, and obviously you're not going to mix stuff together. The truth is, for that matter, even those who would be machmir about using the same dishwasher from the same one for Milch's and Fleish's at separate times, seemingly should be perfectly fine over here. And what could be the problem? It's two different dishwashers. There's a Milch's one and a Fleish's one. So the fact that they're in one big housing, why should they make a difference? Seemingly everybody should think that it should be okay over here. So the question that we do have to ask is there something wrong with running them both at the same time? Is that somehow a problem if you run them, the Milch's and Fleish's ones simultaneously? Now, in a regular house, you don't think about that kind of question because they're not connected to each other, nothing to do with each other. There's one on this side of the kitchen, one on that side. But on this one, there may be something wrong. What could be the problem? So the question starts from a Ramah. The Ramah says in Sim Pezayin Sivav. So Ramah says like this: Ein Arav Mayim Shedichu Hem Kli Basar, Im Mayim Shedichu Hem Kli Chalav. Don't take water that was used to wash Fleish's dishes and mix it together with water that was used with Milch's dishes, and then give it to an animal to eat. No one's going to want to eat this water that you just washing dishes. Give it to an animal. You can't do that because there's an Isra Hana, Basar B'chalav. Not only can you eat it, but you can't have enough of it either. So if you mix the water from washing Milch's dishes with water from washing Fleish's dishes, you mix it together, it'll be Basar B'chalav. And if you give it to the animal, that's an Isra Hana. So when you hear that dim, it sounds exactly like our example. We have water from washing Milch's dishes, water from washing Fleish's dishes, and the Ramah is saying you shouldn't mix them together. So if you look at it just on the surface of it, it sounds like this dishwasher is an example of that dim, and potentially you should therefore not mix the water together. But we're going to look into this halacha a little bit more carefully. We're going to notice two main points, and that will reflect back onto what we're thinking over here. The first is like this. We know that the Ramah says that the Ramah who is more machmir about not bar not when you wash dishes together. Remember the Ramah who Milch's on Fleish's dish and a Milch's pot. He says he's more machmir about that. But even he agrees that in the case where you wash a Fleish's dish in a parva pot, or I guess for that matter in a Fleish's pot, the water stays parva. The only time there was an issue was when you wash a Fleish's dish in a Milch's pot, or the other way around. We did this question where maybe not bar not shouldn't apply. But if you wash a Fleish's dish in a parva pot, the water does not become Fleish's. It is a case of not bar not. So why does the Ramah have a problem if you wash dishes? If you take the water from washing Fleish's dishes and with water washing Milch's dishes, both of those waters are parv. The water that you wash in the Fleish's dishes is parv. The water you wash in the Milch's dishes is meaning, of course, Fleish's is in a Fleish's pot and the Milch's is in a Milch's pot. There wasn't any problems here. So the water in both cases is parv. So what's the problem? Why does the Ramah have a problem with you mixing? Has he concerned with you mixing? Parv water with parv water. What could be wrong with it? Who cares that they had been used for Fleish's dishes? Water washed Fleish's dishes is parv, and so is the Milch's dishes. So the answer is very obvious that the case that I was talking about is that it's not a case of not burnout, but that the dishes were dirty with meat or milk. you wash the fleshig dishes, and you wash the fleshig dishes with it. It was dishes that didn't have just Blios of fleishigs, like in the case of not bernat. It had actual meat on it. You washed the dishes that had full of grease on top of them, and the milk dishes were also full of cheese or milk on them. So, in fact, if you look back in sorry, hey, when we talk about not bernat, the Mechaber says you should know all these discussions about not bernat when you wash dishes. That's only talking about that there was nothing milchigs or fleishigs left on the dish. When you're washing from potatoes or rice or vegetables. If there was meat on there or milk on it, then of course there's no not bernat, because not bernat doesn't work when there's end left on it. So that if anything, that's the unusual case where you have a fleshig dish that has nothing fleshigs on it. It just has Blios of fleishigs, or a milchig dish that doesn't have any milk on it. But our Rambam was talking about a good plain old case where the dish, the water you wash fleshig dishes, means you wash dishes that had meat on them, and you wash milchig dishes, I mean you wash dishes that had milk on them. So there's no potential for not bernat. Okay, there's nothing to talk about saying should it be say not bernat in this case. No, it's not bernat. It's good old fashioned. So the water is fleshigs, and the other water is milchigs, and that's why you can't mix it together. Okay, so now if we now that we know that. So now let's turn back to our double dishwasher and say like this. So let's think about remember there's 3 cycles in a dishwasher. There's a pre-rinse and a wash with soap and a sanitizing cycles at the end. Now, so the sanitizing is really the case of the Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah in Siman Tzadi Hey. That's the case where there's no be'en left. There's no food left on the plate at that point. Or the tiny bits that there are going to be bubbled. There's basically nothing left over there. So that's the case of not bernat. And in that case, there's no problems in that case of us saying maybe the water is fleshigs and milchigs, and the Ramah said not to mix it together. The Ramah in Pezayim is talking in the case where the water is actually fleshigs and milchigs. But the water from our sanitizing cycle is not need fleshigs or milchigs, and it wouldn't be a problem. But just as an aside, before we move on, we know that there's potential to say that maybe that water from the sanitizing cycle should be considered not bernat di bishul. So maybe you should say, since the Ramah is machmir about not bernat di bishul l'chatchila, maybe he should be machmir in this case. But the reason why that's not correct about the sanitizing, the reason why that's not correct is because the Ramah says that not bernat di bishul is mutter. You're allowed to put that into let's say from a fleshig, you're allowed to put that into a milk pot. You just can't eat it with milk itself. So if you put it into a milk pot, it's sort of an in between there. We're not able to eat it with milk like usually we can by not bernat. But since I did bishul, you can't eat it with milk, but you can put it into a milk pot. So mixing with milk water can't be worse than putting it into a milk pot. So basically, the fact that it's ID bishul, or that it's potentially considered ID bishul, is not going to make a difference. Okay, so what we figured out is that the water from the sanitizing can't possibly be relevant to the Ramah in Pei Zayin about mixing water together. The same thing. Like with a dishwasher, the wash cycle, which has soap in it, also can't be any problems because that water is also so to speak, not fleshigs. The fact that there's soap in there prevents time from transferring back and forth between things, so we don't have to worry about maybe that water is fleshigs. There may be meat floating around in there, but that meat is not going to cause any time to transfer to anything. It couldn't make basar b'chol. So what we've narrowed down to this point is that our potential concern about the Ramah about mixing water together would only be relevant to the pre-rinse cycle. Okay, where there's definitely food in that water that's going down the drain, and maybe that water you should not be able to mix that fleshig water with the milchig water. So now we move on to a second point in the Ramah to see if it applies to our case. Now it's like this: the Ramah says the person. The Ramah had said, "What? Don't mix the water, the milchig water, and the milchig wash water and the fleshig wash water together, and give it to your animal, because that would be considered having hanah from basar b'chol." So the Shach says, the only time there's an isur hanah on basar b'chol is when they were cooked together, or they were hot together. Let's say like that. They were hot at the same time. They considered that it was cooked together. So therefore, when the Ramah says, "Don't mix the wash water that's milchigs with the wash water that's fleshigs," obviously that water must be hot. Because if the water wouldn't be hot, there wouldn't be anything to talk about. Because it couldn't become basar b'chol that's asur b'hanah unless it was some kind of a bishul. Okay, unless we could say that they were cooked together. Okay, that's what the Shach says. So Rabbi Krieger asks, he says, wait a second. If it's talking about that the wash waters were hot to the point that they're considered cooked together, to the point that we could therefore say it's asur b'hana. That's what the Shach said. It's got to be so hot and so cooked together that it's able to be considered asur b'hana. If we get that far, so why does Ramah say, don't do this, because if you do it, you're having hana from basar b'chalav. Wait, there's a problem even before you have hana from the basar b'chalav. The problem is that you cook basar b'chalav. Cooking basar b'chalav is also asur. In other words, if this is considered an act of bishul, somehow this is considered bishul of basar b'chalav. It's so hot in such a way that it's considered bishul of basar b'chalav to make it asur b'hana. Well, bishul of basar b'chalav is asur automatically. There's no difference if you're giving it to the animal and even before you give it to the animal. So why does Ramah say, and therefore don't do this because it's considered having hana from it when you give it to your animal? Nothing. You shouldn't be allowed to do it because you're not allowed to cook basar b'chalav together. Okay? That's where we create discussion. So he says, what's going on here is that there was really not so much meat or milk in the water. There might have been some, and maybe even the water on one side is fleshig, and the water it's enough to not be bottled in the water. But overall, between when you mix the two waters together, all the meat would be bottled, and all the milk would be bottled b'shishim. And therefore, there's no isser bishul basar b'chalav because the person is not making a mixture that's going to be together basar b'chalav, because the basar or the chalav or both are going to be bottled. Okay, so he says, okay, and that's the reason why there's no isser bishul basar b'chalav. Okay, so then why is it also to give it to the animal? So he says it's a type of a bitul isser l'chatchila that we're not allowed to set something up in a way that will cause bitul, and you're not allowed to make a mixture of basar b'chalav and have hana from it. You're not from them not making it. You're not allowed to have hana from a mixture like that. So creating a mixture that will only be mutter because it'll include bitul b'shishim, he says that you can't do. That's a type of a bitul l'chatchila, and therefore you're not supposed to do it. If you did it, it's going to be mutter to use. In fact, what the Ramah says at the end, it'll be mutter to use because l'maisa, it's not basar b'chalav. But you set up a situation of sort of a bitul l'chatchila, that you're mixing the milk and meat together in a way that they'll end up being bottled and therefore be allowed to be used, give to an animal. So that's what you're not allowed to do. Okay, that's what Mekveger says. He tells you to also look at a crazy placey, who says a similar answer. The crazy placey answer is a little harder to hear. Crazy placey says that what happened is that you're not sure if the meat and the milk about the b'shishim. It's unclear. And therefore, and it's talking about, so it's a suffix if it will be basar b'chalav. So, and it's talking about that you had a goy mix the wash waters together. So for a goy to mix it together, it's only isser v'amir la'akum. That's an isser d'rabbanan. So we say something d'rabbanan l'kula. No problem of the bishul of it, because maybe it's amir la'akum to do bishul. Well, it's only a suffix because maybe it was batal, so therefore you're allowed to do that. What about having hana from it? If you want to then give it to your animal, that's a suffix of a deraisa. Now it's a shayla, hana is a deraisa, so if you give it to your animal, that's a suffix deraisa. So he says, so that you'd be machmir. Okay, so the same shayla, in the bishul part of it, you have to be machmir. The bishul part you could be makel because you use the goy, so it's suffix d'rabbanan kula. On giving to the animal, there it's a shayla with the deraisa of having hana, so that's why you have to be machmir in that case. Okay, so obvious questions on the way Crazy Placey's version of this is that what in this galgal, there's a rule that if it's the shilas of both the rights and the rabbanans, we have to be machmir on both. And also, there's an awful lot going on here. We think it's maybe batal b'shishim, and you use the guy. Seemingly, the Ramah had some things he should have been telling us. Okay, anyhow, so this Crazy Placey says similar to Mekveger that it has to do with bitul b'shishim, but basically, in the regular case, you would not be allowed to cook it, nor would you be allowed to give it to your behemoth. That's what he says. Okay, that's Mekveger's answer. He also brings that in Minchas Yaakov, he argues on the Shach. He says it doesn't make sense, for exactly this reason, it doesn't make sense to say that it was hot, because if it was hot, then there would have been Isser Hana also. Okay, so he says the truth is, Min Hatim, there's no Isser Hana, because they were not hot. The products mixed together, the wash water was not hot. And that's why the Ramah says in the end, but it's okay, you can give it to the animal. He says, so what's going on? But he says, he also says it's a type of bitul l'chatchila to mix them together cold. Mixing cold wash water and cold wash water that's fleshings and cold wash water that's milchigs, that each have milk and meat in them. That's a type of bitul l'chatchila because you're doing something that had it been hot, you wouldn't be allowed to do that. and you're planning on having enough from it. So you're doing something that you really weren't supposed to do, knowing that b'diavad it's going to be mutter. So that also do because it's bitul l'chadchila. Okay. So now before we get back to specifically our case, both of these people are saying, both of them are saying that if the wash water was hot and the meat and the milk were not bought to b'shishim, okay, if that's what would have happened, then it would be also to mix them together. What the Minchas Yaakov is adding to this is that he's saying is that there's a new din, that if you have cold water that's cold from the milchik side and cold from the fleshik side, and you mix those together, that's also a type of bitul l'chadchila, because they both have milk in them, and then that's a type of bitul l'chadchila. Well, now turn back to our pre-rinse cycle. Seemingly, that's what's going on in our pre-rinse cycle. We have wash water on the milchik side, wash water on the fleshik side. Each one has milk and meat, and each one has milk or meat in it, and it's going to get mixed together. If we run them at the same time, not if we run them one after the other, they won't mix together. One goes down the drain and the other one comes a few minutes later. But if we run them at the same time, then we're doing what the Minchas Yaakov says the Ramah holds you're not allowed to do. To mix these cold things together is what he said you weren't supposed to do. So now maybe, according to this Minchas Yaakov, the way he learns Ramah, maybe it should not be allowed. But Lamai says it doesn't seem that that's correct. Okay? And we could say the same basic idea in two different ways. One is like this. When a person turns on the dishwasher, even if he turns on both dishwashers at the same time, each one's got their own cycle and their own ideas of how it wants to run, and you really have no idea if the water from the fleshik and the milchik are going to drain at exactly the same time. If they drain not at the same time, there's no problem, because one water will be out the drain before the second one comes in. So you want to say it's like that. This is bitul l'chadchila to mix them together. What bitul l'chadchila means is like, don't plan something that Chazal told you not to do. So could it be a bitul l'chadchila when you don't even know what's going to happen? You don't even know if they're going to mix together. I mean, chances are actually they're probably not going to mix together because each one runs in its own cycle. So you're going to say that's called bitul l'chadchila, to say don't go against what the Torah wants. The Torah doesn't want you to mix them together, and you're finding a way to get around it. It's like we're creeping into your mind, and you're saying it's malicious what you're doing to try to go against what the Torah wants you to do or not to do. But can you say that when the guy doesn't even know that's going to happen? It's like sort of like, how can you say that that's bitul l'chadchila? Okay, we could say the same thing from a more technical angle, and that is that there's an exception to the rule. Bitul l'chadchila has an exception to the rule, and the exception is that when the person is not trying to do it, when it's in kavanas levatel, then it's mutter. If he's trying to do something else, he's not trying to do bitul, he's trying to mix something, make some kind of a mixture, and it happens to be that the isra and heter are getting mixed together. That's not a problem with bitul l'chadchila. So in our case, seems to be a great case of in kavanas levatel. I'm trying to wash dishes. I have no interest in mixing waters together. Not only do I not have any interest in mixing the waters together, it's so obvious that I couldn't care less about them because these waters is not like the Ramah's case. These waters are going down the drain. It's not the Ramah's case. You say, I want them to be mixed together because I want to give them to my animal. In this case, you obviously couldn't care less. The water's going down the drain. Why would anybody care that the waters are mixed together? It's totally in kavanas levatel. The guy has no interest in these things being mixed together. So if we were to say that there was some kind of isser bishul on this thing because it was hot and it was isser bishul, we wouldn't care. We might not care what you want or not. But if the whole problem is an in kavanas levatel type of concern, in kavanas levatel doesn't make sense. If it's a bit in vatnus l'chadchila kind of a concern, then when it's in kavanas levatel, then there's no problem. Now, so those are what I think is two versions of a similar reason to say why this Minchas Yaakov doesn't apply. I'll mention quickly a handful of other reasons, potential reasons to be meko, and not that each one of them is valid by itself, but each one of them it adds an extra tzad to be meko. And the first two come from Rikveger in Siman Pei Zayin. Where he's talking about another part of that same Ramah who says about a yid using a pot or making the fire higher on a guy's pot, and he wants to explain why the Ramah says you shouldn't do something with Chatchila. The Krieg is trying to give Staden to be meko. So he says, well, it's in a miskaven when the person makes causes the bishul, the bishla basa b'chalav. It's a shayla again, a bishla basa b'chalav. He says, now, maybe it's a psikration. He says, well, there's a machlekes whether psikration to le'michalei, or in this case, le'ichbaslei, whether that's also altogether. Maybe it's not also, maybe it's also rabbanim. So that's one side. We might usually be machmir about that, but it's a tzad to be makel to say this is an income, enim iskaven, and the psikration is le'ichbaslei. He says a different reason to be makel is that over here, this is what we call psikration l'sha'avar, which is, in his case, you have no idea whether the pot was used for milchigs and fleishigs within 24 hours. That's the shayla over there. So if in truth it was, then what you're doing is a psikration. But if it wasn't, then it's not a psikration. That's a psikration l'sha'avar. A machlekes rishonim again also about what the din is for that is. And so in his case, it's a shayla of the raisa because the shayla bishul basa b'chalav. But we know the Bitul says in the Shabbos that when you have a shayla psikration l'sha'avar, for the raisa you should be machmir, for the burners you should be mekel. So his case, Rabbi Kveige's case of a deraisa, but our case is we talk about just ein latlas and chatchila. That's only drabanan. So here it's a psikration l'sha'avar, meaning we have no idea what the cycles are going to work out to be. Will they time to be exact if the waters will mix? And if the worst of that is a drabanan in latlas and chatchila, then maybe we could make up that psikration l'sha'avar. Another thing is. Rosh Weiss is talking about related dinim about bishul basa b'chalav. He brings the Kesef Mishnah of all places in Hilchos Tumas Meis, Perak Aleph Halacha Beis, says that the only isur bishul basa b'chalav is only if you have some plan on eating or having enough from this afterwards. It could be that if a person has no plans of using it afterwards, there would be no Isser Bishul. They're connected. The Isser Bishul is connected to the Isser Hana and Achila. And he brings from a David Misharim who was asked about Shabin Rav, was asked about a chemist who would be testing Basa B'chalav, but no one was going to eat it. His testing involved cooking, and no one was going to eat it afterwards. That maybe you should consider that according to this Kesef Mishnah, you should be making and say, since no one's going to eat it anyhow, so the Isser Bishul Basa B'chalav doesn't apply. Now Rabbi Shalai says, Lamai says no one's makel based on this din. No one's really makel about this thing. You shouldn't be samech on it, but Lamai says it is another tzad. And the last thing to mention is, second to last thing is that the Rambam himself says this whole thing is a big chumrah. He says, but yeah, but it's not a problem. Okay, but the last thing to mention is, there's when you pour the wash water down the drain. I'm not sure this is so relevant over here. I was going to say it's maybe I'm making a mistake. There's a shayla nachronim about whether irui klivishin could cause bishul basa b'chalav. This is only irui, so since it's only irui, it's a reason I'm not basa b'chalav. But I'm realizing as I'm saying this that it's a mistake because we're talking about within the Minchas Yaakov who said it's even a problem when it's cold and that it's a bitul sechatchila. So it's not so relevant. Anyhow, so we have the solid reason, which is there's no the Minchas Yaakov had talked about with cold, but that doesn't apply over here when the water might not mix and it's going to go down the drain. And so ain't kamas salvato, or you can't call me bitul sechatchila. Two versions of the same thing. And then these all the other stadim. So the long and short is that it seems that there should be no problem using one of the drawers for milchigs and one for fleishigs. Even if they run simultaneously, don't have any concerns about those waters mixing together in the drains.